everyone, this is Sofia Smallstorm doing another podcast. I have with me someone that I met very recently, and he is quite an expert in his field, so I'm hoping that I can do a decent job with this interview, although it's a subject that I've had many questions about, and I'm sure that lots of people listening do, because it's been with us since time immemorial. The subject, I'll start with that, is silver, and of course precious metals. And my guest today is David Morgan, who is apparently a very well-known analyst in this precious metals industry, very highly regarded. He consults, I'm reading from the introduction of his new book, The Silver Manifesto, consults for hedge funds, high net worth investors, mining companies, depositories, and bullion dealers. He publishes the Morgan Report on Precious Metals, MORGAN report. And his first book was Get the Skinny on Silver Investing. He's also a speaker at lots of investment conferences all through the world. So his background is in engineering and finance. And he told me in recent conversations that we've had that what he's really about is this thing called honesty money. So today, I hope that I'll be able to ask David questions that might be kind of plebeian in many ways, very ordinary, but that will reflect the scope of what people have been wondering about metals and particularly silver. How are you, David?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, again, it's very much an honor to have you. Thank you so much for being willing to do this show. So where should we start? I love that story that you told in your first book about when you were small and getting allowance and suddenly the silver coins changed. Would you want to tell that story?
Sure. We lived pretty far out in the country, and we had an acre, and my dad planted about half of it with fruit trees of various kinds. It was in San Diego County, so we could grow almost anything: almonds, grapefruit, tangerines, oranges, apples. I can't name them all. And it was my job to water those trees every Saturday morning. And he had these big troughs around them. So it took quite a while, especially when you're, 11 years old, to wait and wait for the water trough to fill up and then move the hose to the next one. Anyway, the point is I got 25 cents a week for doing that. And so being so far out in the country and just from birth almost being a natural saver, I had a big stack of silver quarters. And then one week my dad gave me my allowance, my 25 cents, and I noticed that it was not silver, that it was like copper in the middle. It was sandwiched with a kind of a silvery sheen, but not really. And it struck me immediately that something was wrong, that, these two coins couldn't be the same. This one's now got copper in it, and these others, this collection, I don't know, $10 worth or whatever it was, were all silver. But I didn't, think that day I'd be, the silver guru, and I say that with tongue in cheek. But it did impress me. And what I really noticed also was it didn't seem like it bothered any adults at all. Of course, later in life I found out that there were a few people that were pretty savvy that knew exactly what was happening, and the Gresham's law took hold, and many people just hoarded the silver, wouldn't spend it, and would spend the new, what I call Johnson slugs. So that was sort of the beginning, although I didn't even know it at the time. But if I could move on real quickly, you talked about what my foundational point is about, who I am or what I do. And I just want to read my mission statement because it might be a good beginning, because when someone has a mission statement, they sort of are saying to others, this is how I see my purpose in life. So with that said, my mission statement is to teach and empower people to understand the benefits of an honest monetary system. So you can see from my mission statement, I don't have gold and silver in my mission statement, but I do have the fact that all people should understand the benefits of an honest monetary system, because a dishonest monetary system, which is what we presently have, is very detrimental to everybody at all levels, and they've always failed. So that's the reason for my what I consider to be my purpose, or at least my vocational purpose in life.
So, David, did the system change from honest money to a not honest monetary system when you got those fake silver quarters?
Not quite. That was the beginning of it. The next step was that we're still on an international gold standard up until August 15th, 1971. So it's a rather not complicated answer or question. It's just that it depends on, how you define it. And I'm not trying to play semantic games at all, but for all practical purposes, everyone in my field pretty much looks at it the same way. When Richard Nixon reneged on the contract or failed to perform on the contract, that was, if you have $35 in U.S. currency and you want to trade it for an ounce of gold, you can do so up until August 15th, 1971. If you watch that speech on YouTube, what you'll hear him say is, I am temporarily suspending the convertibility of the U.S. dollar into gold. Well, that temporary suspension, of course, was from that date forward. So that's the actual point of demarcation, where it was impossible to exchange dollars for anything of value intrinsically, meaning gold or silver.
So, okay, I have to understand this a little better. Today, let's call the price of gold for just a round number, $1,500, right, per ounce?
It's more like under $1,200, but sure.
Oh, whatever.
Okay.
So that shows you how much I look at it. All right, $1,200. But today you can walk into a dealer and you can give him $1,200 plus his premium and say, I want an ounce of gold, can't you?
Absolutely.
So what's the difference? What happened in 1971 for Nixon to say, I'm temporarily suspending the conversion of the U.S. dollar into gold? Is there something about that word conversion? I mean, you can buy gold with U.S. dollars.
Right. No, that's a great question. I really haven't been asked this, but the idea was from the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II that there would be stability in the monetary system. And rather than go on a strict gold standard, they went on a pseudo gold standard, meaning that there was a fixed exchange rate. It was a fixed amount. So a fixed amount of dollars would buy a fixed amount of gold, and that was $35 the ounce. So the U.S. dollar became what's called the reserve currency of the world. And the reason for a strict gold standard is exactly that. In other words, that that the sound as a dollar, as good as gold, which are expressions that used to be synonymous with the U.S. dollar, was that currency was not only convertible at a set price, not a variable price, but that gave it stability. That was the same really as carrying gold in your pocket, and that held. But the belief or the trust started to wane over time because France knew, and all the countries really knew, that the United States had printed a far more large quantity of dollars than there was gold to back it up. So that's how and why it failed, and when it failed was in 1971. So it's not a fact that it can be converted, although that's part of it. It's a fact that a strict gold standard is set and stops the expansion of the currency supply. So because it's a fixed exchange rate at 35 of these things give you one of these things, or $35 give you 1 ounce of gold, that is a policeman on the currency, or that's what it's supposed to do. And that means that the money supply is strictly prohibited from expanding at a rate faster than what the economic growth rate is. The expansion in the money supply is about 1.5% a year. So there isn't any quote unquote inflation. It's a natural rate of increase in the money supply. And what people don't understand, and it gets them upset, is that really in a true gold standard, where the money supply or the currency supply is expanding commensurate with the gold supply, which again would be like 1.5% a year, is that you have a slight deflation in the economy, which means everybody's standard of living gets better and better and better over time, and you don't need any financial planning industry whatsoever, because a dollar today will buy the same in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or 50 years. But that's the adherence to a strict gold standard where the laws of the quote-unquote gold standard are adhered to, which mean the money supply cannot be expanded beyond what the gold backing is. And, of course, every time there is gold-only backing, there is an abuse of that, and the gold standard fails. And that's why I am a big adherent to have at least a bimetallic standard, which means you have both gold and silver backing the currency, and you don't have a fixed exchange rate between the gold and silver, so it's allowed to float to the market to determine what the correct ratio is. But it always boils down to one thing, Sophia, and that's honesty. I mean, whether, many people have told me, well, gold standards fail. And I said, well, gold is an inert element. Gold does not do anything. Gold is just an element on the periodic chart that's valuable because people give it value. It doesn't do anything. It's people. It's the honesty of the people. So if you are a wildcat banker like there was in the 1800s, and you say your currency is the Sofias, and you're going to back it with, 1/10 ounce of gold, and you start printing these things, and you're fraudulent, guess what? Whose fault is that? Is that gold's fault? No, of course not. It's the banker's fault because they lied. They said that this amount of currency was representing this amount of gold, and it did not. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully I explained that well. Is that clear or not?
Well, I took notes, and what I've understood here now is that the bottom line is that we do not have this thing called a strict gold standard or a true gold standard anymore.
That's right. We don't have any kind of precious metals backing anywhere in the world for any currency at all.
Right. And this fixed rate of exchange with this very regulated slow growth of the 1.5% per year, we don't have that either.
That's correct.
So that throws us into a kind of turmoil. And as you were talking, I was thinking about how they've really made a fiction out of money. And that has paralleled the wild fictions that have been perpetrated on us alongside of the fictional money. You know what I'm talking about? Fictions in quote-unquote medicine, in just the culture, the whole germ theory of disease and what we use to clean our houses, chemical products. I mean, this is the stuff I get into. So I just noticed that we live in this increasingly fake and very, what's the word I want to say? Kind of like it's upside down, it's inside out, it's twisted. There's no logic to it. It operates on whim that isn't ours.
Well, a couple thoughts. And I seldom quote myself, but I will. One of them is when you can lie about money, you can lie about anything. And the reason I say that is because money transcends almost everything. Money transcends religion, it transcends age, it transcends national origin, it transcends, what political party you're for. Money touches almost everybody in the world at some level. So it's transcendent. Everyone is concerned about their money, how much they have, how much they should save, how much they need, and on and on. So it's transcendent from that aspect. And I want to continue because the other point to reinforce what you just said, Sophia, is this. We teach our kids that you can't get something for nothing. Now, in a true gold standard, you can't get currency for free. In other words, you have to have more gold coming out of the ground if you're going to increase the money supply. But once you cut it from gold, which is what happened August 15, 1971 under Nixon, is he called it free floating, which means you can actually get something for nothing. You can print up currency and people have to accept it due to the legal tender laws. And you can go over to China and buy a bunch of, goods and ship them over to the United States, and you give them something that intrinsically is worth zero. And all money reverts to its intrinsic value of zero. That's not a direct quote, but Voltaire said that. that eventually all paper money reaches its intrinsic value of zero. So that's the situation we're in. But again, coming back to if you can lie about money, you can lie about anything. There's a direct correlation between the degradation of the monetary system, meaning debasing the currency, just printing more and more. It becomes worth less, and then it's eventually worthless. And there's a direct correlation between that and the debasement of the moral structure of the society. Because when you have an honest monetary system, you have more honesty in the fabric of society, and there's a direct correlation in between those two. Yet very few people even bring up the topic because it's a little on the esoteric side, but it's true. If you have an honest monetary system, you have more honesty throughout the system. There's more trust throughout the system. When you have a fake or phony, convoluted system, it does corrupt everything. I mean, everything is corrupted in the society. We've got the air supply, the water supply, the food supply, the medical situation, the world leaders, and it just goes on and on and on. There's not much out there that's left that isn't corrupted. And of course, an ounce of silver, an ounce of gold is still uncorrupted. That, as long as it's truly 999 fine, not counterfeit, which is rare, but it does happen. But the point is that that's something that's the same always and everywhere. The mass of that 1 ounce gold coin or 1 ounce silver coin doesn't change. Its mass is constant through the universe. And that's something that people seek over time, is not so much gold and silver. They seek stability. They seek truth. They seek something of substance that is real, that they can believe in and trust. And that's why there'll be a big move into a run to gold, because when all currencies are failing, especially the U.S. dollar, there'll be a run to gold because there'll be a run to something that you can trust.
Well, David, that is great, all of that, and I really appreciate that synthesis. I want to ask you about something that you mentioned in those many words that you just gave us, and if this was this concept of above ground metals, and I would assume that is sort of versus below ground. But how do we know how much above ground metal there is? How do we know? How do we know that they're telling us the truth?
Well, we don't know for certain what the amount is, but it's pretty easy to do a thought experiment and get a pretty good idea of the above ground supply. For one thing is, gold is precious. It's been considered money for thousands of years. So the mining records go back fairly far. And we also know what the gold-silver ratio is, or what I call the natural ratio. The natural ratio is how much gold to silver there is in the ground. So that ratio a long time ago was about 12 to 1. Today it's roughly 9 to 1, but I'm just using round numbers, 10 to 1. And because I can do the math in my head very easy. So from and these are competing databases. In other words, it's not like one person says, oh, I know, and here I wrote it down, and here's what it is. Now, this is a cumulative look at how much has been mined by several different authorities, different books, different people, different methodologies, etc. And right now, the purveying number is about 5 billion ounces of above ground gold and 50 billion ounces of mined silver throughout history, which is, again, your 10 to 1 ratio. So they sort of collaborate each other. So that's one way to check, is it true or not? But could both numbers be fake? And the answer is yes, it could. But the amount of reporting in the last, let's say 50 years is pretty accurate. It's pretty hard to fake the numbers because these are public companies that are reporting, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a burro miner, I call them, that some, mom and pop have a burro in the middle of Mexico and they're taking silver and gold out of a mine and, refining it. That goes on all the time. But those are small amounts relative to the overall mining industry at large on the globe. So I'm pretty confident that those numbers are valid, that throughout history you've had approximately 5 billion ounces of gold mined and approximately 50 billion ounces of silver mined.
So the ratio is silver to gold, approximately 10 to 1, but in fact 9 to 1 at this time.
That's
right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So you call yourself Silver Guru, and tongue-in-cheek, fine. Tell me, please, why silver is so volatile.
Because it's a smaller market, anytime you have a small market, it is much easier to move the price either up or down, and it's much easier to manipulate the price because, it's like anything else in a marketplace. Let's say there's, in your town, there is a bunch of car dealers, but there's only one dealer that sells pickup trucks, and he only has 30 pickup trucks on his lot. But you live in a pretty big town, and it's rural, and there's a lot of demand for pickup trucks. Well, since it's such a small market, he'll have a lot of ability to move the price up and down depending on what he wants to do because there's a pretty good demand and he's got such a small market. So that may not be a very good analogy, but that's the idea. The idea is that in any small market, it's a lot easier to manipulate the price or move the price. And even if there's no manipulation, because I don't want to just use that, a small market is easier to move. Let's say that, a lot of people in your community decide, I'm going into backyard farming and I need a pickup truck because I got to get all these supplies into my yard. So there's a huge demand for pickup trucks all of a sudden. Everyone decides they're going to do a backyard garden. All of a sudden, he's going to be able to lift the price because he's got 50 people and he's only got 40 trucks. So price is going to determine where those 40 trucks go to. On the other hand, let's say, 2 years go by and everybody decides, no, there's one organic farm. It's better than anything I could grow. I'm getting rid of this truck. I can't stand it. I don't need it. It uses a lot of gas. So all of a sudden the same dealer gets inundated with trucks that people want to sell back to him. And he's done because these trucks aren't very valuable at all. Nobody wants them. So that's again, probably a very corny analogy. This is basic economics, but I think I've made the point. Small markets are much more volatile than big markets. And the gold market is far bigger than the silver market. And the gold market is very small compared to the other financial markets.
So now, why did you specialize in silver? Because it interested you? Because of your coin story?
Somewhat. I think the biggest influence was, being overeducated, and I guess there's really no such thing, but I was interested in money as an 11-year-old, obviously. And so I made a study, self-study of economics and money and monetary history and all this stuff, started at a pretty early age. And I determined what, fractional reserve banking was and how they could create something for nothing that we already discussed. And this whole idea of how the banking system worked really disgusted me. And I also knew from my studies that all these things always fail. There's always a currency crisis of some type. And in a currency crisis, there's big disruptions in the economy. So knowing all that, I decided I was going to get into the gold market at a pretty early age. So I was in my 20s. I pretty much would be considered more of a gold bug than a silver bug. And then we had the whole run through the 70s up to January 21st, 1980, when gold peaked at $850 on the spot market, but $875 in the near month. And gold went in December of 1979 at $300 an ounce to $850 in January. I mean, just those last 6 weeks or so, it almost tripled. But silver had gone from $6 in January of 1979 to $50 in January 1980, a year later. It had gone up 800%, whereas gold had only gone up less than 300%. So being, maybe greedy or inquisitive or whatever, put whatever term on it you want, it caught my attention. And so I had to ask the question, which I just already answered, is why did silver go so much higher than gold? Well, it went so much higher because it's a smaller market. But I didn't know that at the time. But what I did know is that the Hunt brothers were involved in the silver market, and they were billionaires. And I figured a billionaire would be into gold. Why did they buy silver instead of gold? So that was my big question. So I started to study silver more and more and more. And the more I studied it, the more I determined that silver's dynamics were really more favorable than gold. And there's also a philosophical component as well. It has to do with my personality. And I am kind of a big softy when it comes to the underdog. I've always been for the underdog. It's the way I'm built. I mean, the kind of movies that really touch me are, the high school kids that live on the poor side of the town, and they've got a kind of crappy football team, and the rich kids got a better football team and better uniforms, but they get the right coach at the smaller school, and they makes them believe in themselves, whatever, and then there's this big football game, and the underdogs win. That's the kind of stuff. Corny. I know I just made a very corny example, but I've always been, so the people's money has always been silver. Silver's been money and used as money more places, more often, in far more transactions than gold ever has. Gold is sort of a nation state, king to king, nation to nation settlement process. Not that gold isn't used by the public, but in a precious metal standard, silver is used far more often because, again, it's the people's money. There's more of it, roughly 10 times as much. Not anymore. We can talk about that later, but it's again, a lot of reasons, and part of it, again, I'm repeating, is I'm for the underdog. I think silver is the underdog metal. I don't think it's valued correctly right now, and I think it's going to do similar to what it did in 1980, meaning that the actual returns or the gains that you're going to make are going to be better in silver than they will be in the gold market. However, I just want to be clear, and for consistency purposes, I think anyone that's interested in the precious metal should own both. I don't think you should own just silver. It's too volatile, and I could be wrong. Gold balances a precious metals portfolio. I look at precious metals, plural. I don't think that, again, you should be in just one or the other. I think you should have a combination of both the metals.
Well, David, it sounds, many people, it's kind of a luxury to go and buy any silver or any gold. I have friends who tell me they have like 20 pieces of silver, and I go, well, there are people out there who have thousands of pieces of silver, and they don't know what to do right now, because it's taken such a drubbing. And I had asked you that in our phone calls, and you had said that they lowered the silver price for industrial purposes. It's used so much in industry. So can you give us some of the industries in which they do use silver and what they use it for?
Sure. First of all, real quickly, silver conducts heat better than any element. It conducts electricity better than any element. And because of those properties, anything electrical or electronic especially uses some amount of silver. So we're in a huge electronic world, especially from roughly 2000 where the tech boom started. So the iPhone, the iPad, the laptop, the desktop, any of these things, the DVD player, all of these devices use some amount of silver. And it's because it's the most economic and it conducts electricity better than anything else. So even if, people say, well, could you substitution? Let's do something. Well, if you substituted gold, platinum, palladium, they would conduct almost as well. But all of those are far higher in price per unit value per gram than silver. So silver is the lowest cost and does the best job anyway. So that's one of the many uses. The other one that most people are very familiar with is green energy. And one of the biggest components of green energy is solar panels. Solar panels use silver. Again, it converts light to energy more efficiently than anything else. And so silver is used a great deal in the solar panels that are being used all over the world. Other industries are the medical industry. Silver is a natural biocide. In fact, silver will kill some of these, I'll call bugs, I'm not a doctor by a long shot, that antibiotics will no longer get. And this is something that the medical profession certainly doesn't want people to know. They don't tout it because silver is a natural element. They can't bottle it and market it, although there's individuals that do, this colloidal silver type of stuff. But it's something that actually can kill some of these antibiotics, some of these, I'll call them bugs, non-medical term, that these antibiotics do not get. There's other applications in uses catalysts, soldering, brazing. Basically, I could go on and on, but the best thing to do for those that's very interested is just go to the Silver Institute, type in Silver Institute into a good search engine, and get on that website. And they have page after page of the use of silver in industry.
So we had two recent bubbles in this silver market. We had 1980 and then this 2011 bubble. What happened to industry when the price shot up like that?
Very little. First of all, there's a organization called the Silver Users Association. And silver is the only commodity that has this users association. It was founded quite some time ago, and it's basically a group of the largest users of silver that basically band together to help keep silver in favorable to them, favorable to the users, which means a price where they can make a greater profit. Now, that's not exactly the mandate. If you read it, you can make your own determination of what they say they want for the silver market. But the point is very clear. There is no other commodity that has a users association. These people buy direct from the smelter or direct from the mines or through the smelter. So they have offtake contracts and they go out long term. And of course that assuages these big, volatile moves that usually happen in a short period of time. So they will have contracts that may buy silver a year in advance at a set price. That could be one example. Or they might buy it quarterly based on the spot price per month, plus, 5 cents or whatever. And so they mitigate those type of moves by buying a large amount over time. Either they set the price and won't pay above it, or they set the price based on the movement of the market, but it's mitigated because they do it in large tranches. So does it have a big effect on them? Not necessarily. I mean, this isn't true in every case, but in most cases this is true. And of course they take advantage of it. If there's a big price in silver, they'll up the price of their product. The thing is that most people don't understand is that price is inelastic on the demand side for industry in almost every case you can think of. Quick couple of examples. If you're if you are what's a high-end refrigerator? I don't even know. Gen Air maybe? I don't know. But a high-end refrigerator, and there are these, you can find these, and I don't know what the brand names are, but they have all kinds of silver in these things. They have silver in the glass because it's, again, a natural biocide, so it keeps it very clean. And, of course, there's electronics on the panel, and there's all this stuff. So it uses silver in it. But the cost of the amount of silver that's in this high-end refrigerator might be, at the most, a tenth of an ounce, and it's probably not even near that amount. So at today's price of $16, you're looking at $1.60, okay? So if the price of silver goes up fivefold, you're still only looking at around $10 of silver in that high-end refrigerator. So it's price inelastic on the demand side. It doesn't matter what the price is because the amount used per unit of refrigerator is so small. And again, that's true in almost every industry. Well, what about solar panels? Solar panels have been squeezed down a great deal. The amount of silver used per solar panel is significantly less than what it was, say, a decade ago. And yet the efficiency is the same or better than it was a decade ago, which is the free market, by the way. That's what the free market's really all about, is squeezing the margins, making more profit or making a better product for the same amount of money. That's in a real free market if you have such a thing. And there are vestiges of it that still remain, but not many in my view. So that's the idea that in most industrial uses, now where does it directly affect it? That would be in silverware. That would be in jewelry. Those areas. Silverware, pretty much direct correlation. The markup on silverware is roughly 100% or greater. So the amount of silver, if you have $1,000 8-piece sterling silver set, there's on a melt value basis, it's about 500. So they have room to move the margin, take less profit. That would be an example. Jewelry in the West, there's huge markups again. Starting with what silverware is, it's that or 3 or 4 times as much. However, in the Asian countries or in the East, gold and silver both, particularly gold more than silver, but both are sold on a weight basis. So jewelry and silverware are directly correlated, but those industries, basically, if there's a huge shoot up in the price of silver, they just mark it up, and since the price is higher, the demand usually falls off, and that's, basic economics. So again, you asked me industrial-wise. Industrial has very little effect. Jewelry and silverware, which you could call those industries, the jewelry industry or the silverware industry, would have a direct effect.
You mentioned this Silver Users Association. Is that the same as the Silver Cartel?
Well, there isn't anything called a silver cartel, but you could call it a cartel, absolutely.
Okay. So that was one of the things that you had mentioned in one of our talks, the Silver Cartel.
Well, there's normally referred to as a gold cartel, which is this idea that there is a bunch of bullion banks and central banks and financial institutions that work together as a cartel to suppress the price of gold. And they can't really suppress the price of gold without suppressing the price of silver because they usually travel together. There's an 85% correlation between gold and silver. It's a very, very high correlation. Gold goes up, silver goes up, gold goes down, silver goes down. There's nothing correlates at 100% except the element itself. Gold correlates to gold 100%. Nothing else will correlate that closely. But 85 is a huge correlation. So it'd be almost impossible for the bankers to keep gold suppressed and silver to be going, $100, $200 an ounce as a quick example, and gold to sit there and people will go, wait a minute, something's wrong. Silver's going really high. Why isn't gold going up? So they pretty much have to work in conjunction with each other. And they do. You'll see that when gold gets smashed really, really hard, silver gets smashed really, really hard. And that's the way it's been for quite some time.
They're like brother and sister.
Correct.
Okay, so David, what is paper silver, paper holdings in these metals? Can you explain that?
Sure. It's a derivative. And a derivative is just what it sounds. A derivative is anything that is a financial instrument that is derived from the underlying asset. So, if you have a wheat as an example, and you make a piece of paper that has a contract that says I'll deliver wheat in the future, that piece of paper is a representation of something physical, but in reality all it is a piece of paper that says I will deliver to you X bushels of wheat at 3 months from now. Well, no one knows if, the wheat's going to be there 3 months from now. So that is a derivative of the underlying commodity. And it's, of course, there's derivatives for commodities, there's derivatives for stocks, there's derivatives on derivatives, and the derivatives on those derivatives. It's really gone down the rabbit hole. So anything that is not the actual product, like the stock or the commodity or the currency, is a derivative of that underlying asset. The asset is something you can literally touch. I mean, a currency is really a concept, but in today's world still, this may not be true in the future, there are physical pieces of paper that you can go touch that are called dollars. They're really not, but regardless. So currency markets, stocks, and commodities all have derivatives. So those are the paper instruments, and they get more and more convoluted all the time. In other words, you can have, as I said before, a collection of different types of derivatives, or even the same derivatives in the same asset class. So you can have a bunch of different types of silver derivatives and package those together as a security of some type, and that's a new derivative. That's a collection of 5 other silver derivatives, and again it just goes on and on. So anything that isn't actually there. And so the derivatives market in the silver market is at least 10 to 1, but that's extremely conservative. It's probably more like 100 to 1. So for normally any physical ounce of silver or gold that's out there, there's 100 pieces of paper that have silver or gold on them that in theory could be converted into the actual physical, but that happens about 1% of the time. It's just like in your booklet about, what happened with the banking system that you wrote, Sophia. It's the same idea of fractional reserve banking. It's fractional reserve silver banking or gold banking. It's that, and in fact, that's actual banking in your paper, that only 1 out of 10 people ever came in and asked for their physical gold, they were happy to carry these pieces of paper that represented it. And so the bankers quickly figured out they could increase the money supply and make more profit by pretending there's more there than there really is. Same thing in the futures market. Only maybe 1% of those contracts ever come to fruition where someone actually demands the underlying commodity. And it's not true just in the silver market. It's true in the wheat market, the soybean market, the soy oil market, or whatever you would care to name. So there's a big cushion between the paper market and the physical market, and this buffer usually takes care of it. But we already had the financial crisis in 2008, which has not resolved. And in that downturn, both gold and silver went up to high premiums. And that means that the physical market was extremely tight, demand was extremely high. So even though the paper price said X, the price you paid in silver was about X plus 30%. And the gold market, the premiums were up 10, 12%, where they're normally like 3 or 4. And silver is normally like 5, 6. And so that showed that the demand was far greater than the supply, but still the market took care of it. That premium of 30% was enough for the market to clear. And that's all a market's supposed to do. It's supposed to determine, going back to my corny example, the guy that wants those pickup trucks, the market's going to determine, I will bid this high for that pickup truck, and the last guy that bids the highest gets that 40th truck, and the other 10 people that wanted one walk away. They weren't willing to pay that amount for a pickup truck.
So I have to get this straight in my head now. This ratio of 100 to 1, the derivative amount to the real stuff, does that endanger or falsify the world of silver?
Absolutely, because for a long time, the market doesn't care if it's being satisfied in paper or satisfied in physical, meaning that you've just created the supply. You've inflated the supply 100-fold. Let's go back to the pickup truck example. Let's say that this guy puts out certificates that says good for one pickup truck. 1 month from now, 2 months from now, 3 months from now, and he prints those things up. Well, these people believe that they can get a pickup truck, but they have to wait a month, 2 months, 3 months. There's not going to be a problem unless those people decide they want that pickup truck and the supply is not there. But this guy's pretty smart, and he knows that let's say he's leased these trucks out, and he knows he's going to have a pretty good supply, and he knows that the price right now is pretty tight, so these people are going to, they don't really want a pickup truck. They want to speculate on what the price of pickup trucks are going to do. So they're not really interested in the pickup truck at all. All they're interested in is price movement. So they're going to hold on to that, and they're going to sell that certificate, that piece of paper, to somebody else that thinks that the price of pickups is going up even higher. It's the same thing in the silver market. So most of the settlement, again, 99% of it, is settled in cash. So I make quote unquote money. Well, you make currency. You made a profit, let's say. And that's paid off in electronic digits. And that's all the person was ever interested in. They were never interested in getting any physical silver. All they were interested in was speculating on price movement. And that's what makes it so difficult as a real silver investor or gold investor, is that most of the market by far is controlled by the paper markets, not by the physical reality. And that's the old adage, the tail wagging the dog. I mean, the dog is the body. It should be in control, but it's not. It's a little tail that's controlling everything.
Well, this is great information for me, because it straightens out a lot of questions and, wonderings that I had. So now I'm going to ask you, and I think I know the answer to this. Do the derivative people then make the bubbles?
Yes.
Okay. That's really too bad, isn't it? I mean, it's just this huge game.
It is. It's based on it's based on a lot of things. I mean, I really don't have a big axe to grind with the futures market from the initial founding of it, because there were reasons to have a futures market, and it was a ability for a farmer to basically get paid and be able to sell his crop at a decent price that he was satisfied with, and the other side, the speculator, to go ahead and speculate. And the basic concept was fine. The problem is that idea, or those days are long, long gone. That whole concept is a quaint little project that ended years and years ago. The situation now, of course, is with these computers and high frequency trading and the speculative excesses that have taken place for years now, and the interventions in the market and the rules that have favored the shorts. In other words, the people that play these derivatives, the big houses, the people that can print money at whim, i.e. the banks, have all kinds of advantages. For example, in the futures market, generally speaking, if you produce the commodity, you get a 30% advantage. If you are a hedger, and that means that you grow wheat and you're in the wheat market, then you do not have to put up as much margin for the derivative that you do if you're a speculator. Well, that to me is actually okay. I mean, it makes sense that that wheat farmer's probably needs his cash to plow his fields and buy water and package the wheat and transport it. I'm okay with it in theory or in concept. However, if you move over to the silver market, these banks get this 30% discount, and they don't mind silver at all. They don't have anything to do with it. All they've done is finance some of these mines, perhaps, if that. But, of course, the market doesn't really give a very strict criteria for what a hedger is. So not only are they able to print money as much as they ever want ad infinitum, they also get a 30% discount, which gives them extreme leverage that's got an advantage to everybody else in the marketplace. So these things just get more and more bizarre the more you look at them. But it's a rigged game. And, of course, when I say that, people say, well, why should I ever buy, silver or gold? I mean, David, you just told me these paper markets are in control. The reason that you should is because paper doesn't equal the real thing. Doesn't equal it in the wheat market, doesn't equal in the silver market, doesn't equal in the housing market, doesn't equal it in the pickup truck market. And so there will be a day when there will be a situation where there's a non-delivery. And again, going back to 2008, it's already taken place in a brief period of time where we saw what happened. And what happened was, if you want the real metal, you've got to pay a big premium to get it. If you want the paper metal, you have got to, you could go get it. There's a big discrepancy now. To be fair and to be honest and be clear and not mislead anyone, when the physical silver market had those 30% premiums, there was a shortage in what I call the retail silver market. Those are the silver coins and the small silver bars. In the commercial world, which is what the futures market deals with, the 1,000-ounce silver bars were not in short supply. So I did what's called an arbitrage. I took the ability to buy silver at the $9 price, where other people are paying about $13, and get these ugly $1,000-ounce bars delivered for a little markup, because you have to pay transportation. There was a little bit of charge from the futures exchange to clear the paperwork, etc. So I was buying silver. I bought 3,000 ounces, roughly $27,000 worth. When everyone else, not everyone else, but a lot of retail people that couldn't afford that kind of quantity were paying like $13 an ounce. I sent the bars to a friend of mine that has a mint, and I minted those coins into 1 ounce rounds. And I could sell those at $13.50. That's called arbitrage. So I'm buying in one market at $9 and selling in another market at $13.
Well, you can do that because you're the silver guru. But that's called being creative, really. Mm-hmm. It's really getting into the business, not the industry, I was about to say. But you're in the silver business. This is what you do. But normal people, so you're really suggesting that if you are going to do this, you want the real thing and not the paper. But if you want to play games and you want to stand yourself where there's the most quick gain, then you might go into the paper world, right?
Yeah, I think that's well said. And also, again, the point is that there'll be a day, I believe strongly, and it's happened in the past, where the paper system blows up, where they're unable to deliver. And even though at the example I keep using in 2008 crisis, it really was not a silver shortage. There was a silver retail product shortage. There's two different things. The commercial bar market was not in short supply. But I think it'll probably happen in the gold market. Gold's far more popular than silver is. And with China buying so much, India buying so much, I think you'll have a situation where one of these big players, such as China, will be standing for delivery and they just won't get it. And it's already happened. I mean, this thing with Germany, I mean, the bank says, oh, we don't care if we don't get our gold for 7 years, but that's not what the people want. And so there have been instances. There was this Dutch bank where people had accounts in physical gold and they made them settle in paper. And that's a reneging of the contract. That's, changing the rules on them. So this is something that concerns me a great deal. But when the run to gold really starts in earnest, in other words, greater than it is already, and silver, there'll be the inability, because a lot of people that hold paper silver right now, as an example, in other words, they've got this very pretty looking certificate that says they've got 1,000 ounces in their bank. And so they go into their bank and they say, I don't want this certificate anymore. I want the physical silver. Well, the bar is big and it's heavy and, you don't want it. No, I want it. Well, stay there. These type of things are going to take place where people that think that they own it don't. In fact, there was a major bank. I think it was Morgan Stanley, but I don't want to misrepresent anyone or anything. But it was a major bank such as a Morgan Stanley that was charging people not interest. They were charging storage fees on silver that didn't exist. These people were all getting their little, statements saying they own so much silver in this bank, and the bank didn't have any silver. Of course, that's fraud. And they had to pay a penalty and everything else. But did they have to pay in silver? No. They just paid in fiat, which, again, is basically a crime in my view. But that's what the court settled it. Well, you have to pay these people back, so they had to take it in cash, not in silver, and you have to pay a penalty, et cetera. But this is the games they play, and this is, are you settling in the commodity that these people thought they had? No. You're settling with the cash equivalent. Whether, put a piece of paper down that says 1 on it and put a silver dollar down that says $1 on it, and they're not the same thing.
So, David, when there's another bubble, the next bubble, how does one identify? Well, first of all, the obvious is it's starting to climb, and it's climbing, and it's climbing, and everybody's getting hysterical. And I knew some dealers who told me that people were beating their doors down to buy silver. And this was when it was about 42, then it was 45, then it was 48 in 2011. So people, once they see something happening, they want to be in on it. This is the lemming behavior, right?
Correct.
So they all want to do it. But I listened to one of your interviews, which I actually understood a portion of. I deserve a pat on the back for that. Because, I was expecting this to be way above my head, and I actually got something out of it. And there was, what you mentioned was balancing. So balancing, as I understood it, was that when these climbs start to happen, you want to shed what you've been holding onto so that you get something out of it. So you don't just ride it and wait until it starts to sink again, right?
Exactly.
But when you're balancing, when you're shedding and you're recouping FRNs for it, Federal Reserve notes, what are you doing? You can use that money, I suppose, in the present tense, the present time, to buy something with or do something with, but it seems to me that you don't want that anyway, that fake money.
Well, it depends on your philosophy. I mean, I'm trying to be practical about it because, first of all, the reality is that piece of paper only has value because, one, there's a law that says that you have to pay, you have to accept it, but the intrinsic value of it really is zero. But the reality is that you can buy Starbucks coffee with it. So certainly you want to take your profit. First of all, let me backtrack a little bit. You said, when do you know? You know when a market goes parabolic, that's by looking at a chart. And so when you see a parabolic move in the stock market, the housing market, the silver market, the corn market, or whatever, you have to really pay attention. And the more people want something, the nearer the top you're getting. So there's sentiment and there's the parabolic move. And that's the biggest problem I am going to have, is that when silver goes ballistic the next time, which probably a few years off, probably 2017 or so, is getting people out. Because even my people that admire me now or trust me now or whatever, some of them will turn on me and they will be giving me information that I'm wrong, that silver is not only going to 100, it's going to go to 200. Now, I don't know where it's going to go. No one knows the market better than the market. I'm not saying that I do. What I am saying is that you don't want to get the last tick. That's an amateur's game, meaning, I can get out at 48. You don't want to sell after it's peaked. You want to sell into strength because you have a lot of buyers. That pickup dealer, when he has 50 people and he's only got 40 trucks, he wants to sell them all that day because there's a huge demand that day. It might change the next day. Maybe half the people decide they don't want to have a backyard farm. So you want to sell in the strength. And then the problem is, what's your philosophy on money? Well, the reality is if that money's still buying something, then, pay off your college debt, pay off your mortgage on your vacation home, buy a new car, start a business. I mean, there's lots of opportunities that you can do with that quote-unquote currency or that quote-unquote money. It's just I like to teach people that follow my work to have an idea of what you want to do, because you wouldn't want to be in the theoretical position of having a lot of cash and then the cash becomes worthless the next day. Now, that's an extreme example, but I do it as a thought experiment because I'm trying to back you up, Sophia, that, I don't want this cash. Well, there's only a point where you don't. And that's the hardest part for me, again, because as the silver and gold markets are making new highs day after day after day, and they're only going up and up and up, and the panic is becoming manic. Everybody wants to get in the gold market. And why would we sell for paper? This paper's worthless. That's why I'm getting out of it. So you have to have pretty much a plan ahead of time, making sure, one, that settlement can be made in cash or spend your metal. In other words, my plan, or part of it at this point in time, has been well thought out, and I don't know what I'm going to buy, but I use the land example. And so if I can buy, forested land north of me, I can make a contract in silver and say I will buy these 100 acres for X amount of silver, write the contract, go through the escrow, and present, the silver on the close of escrow. So that's another way to do it. So you don't have to go through the fiat system.
Well, that's assuming your seller will take silver.
Yeah.
And that may or may not be the case. But what are you going to do if you buy that land? I know I'm kind of pushing it here, but, and there's some beaver or bird on it that becomes an endangered species, and the federal government comes and says, hey, we need this land. It's a habitat for this endangered, thing. And so we're going to give you fair market value, or we'll give you X for your land, and you don't have anything to say about it.
Well, yeah, no argument. I mean, that could happen. So it's happening. I mean, we both know that type of thing happens. But, I mean, that just means I made a bad purchase with my silver is what that means. But that doesn't mean that other people would make that same mistake. I mean, basically, it's money. If you have to convert it to fiat and the fiat still works, then do it that way. If you want to go direct, you can have that option is all I suggest. You don't have to do it that way. And there's a possibility when this market really takes off again that the established banking system may start giving loans on precious metals again. I mean, the whole banking system was founded on precious metals. I mean, the goldsmiths who started the banking system. But, of course, it's been so convoluted from those days till now, it doesn't represent anything close to that. But we may go full circle. We have in previous times during monetary history where we go, gold, fiat, back to gold, gold, fiat, back to gold. And will it happen again? I don't know. Could it happen again? Yes. Or some type of standard that's similar where it's backed by oil and gold. Gold is a component of the special drawing rights. Or even when the euro was founded, it has nothing to do with gold exactly, but to get in the euro, everybody had to have a certain amount of gold to get into the euro, believe it or not, if you go back and research the history of it. So gold has always been important in the monetary system, even though the powers that be will deny it. Why do central banks still own gold? They don't own any silver anymore, but they own gold.
And why don't they own silver?
Because they've done such a great job of demonetizing it and making it just an industrial quantity. I think the Silver Users Association may have had something to do with that. But if you go back and look at the research that's done on The Wizard of Oz, that whole thing back in the previous to the crime of 1873 was again to my philosophy of being for the underdog. I mean, when the country of the United States was on basically a silver standard, and it was founded on a silver standard, by the way, you had competing currencies, more or less, even though it was fixed, 16 ounces of silver equaled 1 ounce of gold. The banking establishment owned most of the gold. And so they made it, they demonetized silver. And that's what the Yellow Brick Road was all about, was that it would be a only gold standard, not a silver and gold standard. It screwed the people in the West, which were the pioneers, so to speak, because it devalued the amount of silver. I mean, Dorothy's wearing silver slippers in the book, not ruby slippers like in the movie. It all has to do with the banking establishment converting from a bimetallic standard to a monometallic standard. And there's a great series of papers out called The Gold Standard, One Step to Fiat. And I agree with the argument that once you're on a gold standard, you know, the old adage that when you own the gold, you make the rules. Well, you own most of the gold, you make the rules that you're on a gold standard. Then it's pretty easy to, if you only have one metal to control, they say, well, we're only going to back the gold standard by 40% gold. And then we're only going to back it by 10, and then we're going to quit the gold standard. We're going to go back on the fiat. And as I said earlier, you see monetary history go, you know, honest money, stability, fiat, disruptions, collapse, or disruptions is probably a better word, back to gold, stability. But again, going full circle and backtracking all the way to the beginning of the interview, you know, it's not gold's problem. I mean, people say, well, gold standard fails. Well, gold standard doesn't fail if it's adhered to. What happens is the honesty of the people is what fails. So it's the human problem. It's not a gold problem.
Well, you know, in my very sort of rudimentary study of silver and gold, as I became more aware in general of these conspiracies and deceptions, you start becoming aware of the importance of metals as opposed to the fiat currency. That's part of the education that you get. And people would always say to me, no matter what, you'll always find someone who will take your silver in exchange for something. You don't have to go through the institutions. You don't have to go through the corporate world. You can always do barter with silver because it's been used over the ages for exactly that. And the increments are much smaller than gold, what it's valued at in the current environment. But then comes this confiscation, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had confiscation of gold in the Depression. People weren't allowed to own it except for numismatic coins, I think. And you could, you know, I think people know that those are collector's coins, not rounds or increments of standard measurement of the metal. But what if that happens again? And it includes silver.
Well, then, if it happens, and it could, I don't rule it out. I don't think it would, but it could. What happens if you lost your investment? Now, let's just go back to when it did happen. When it happened, and I think it was 33, John Exter is my expert. He's long dead. He stated, and I believe him, so it comes down to trust, that many people did not turn in their gold, even though it was illegal to own it. And what they did do was they stuck it in a coffee can and they buried it outside their kitchen window. And when Mama was doing the dishes or making cakes or baking or cooking, she could keep an eye on that part of the yard where that gold was buried. So in other words, just because it becomes illegal doesn't mean everybody turned it in. They didn't. They held on to it. In fact, according to John Exter, a lot of people just ignored it and just kept their mouths shut and didn't, of course, spend it. I mean, you're taking a pretty big risk if you pop up with a gold coin. Not that some of that didn't take place. I'm sure some did. But mostly just went into hiding. And so that's one component. The other one, I think, today, and what we're witnessing, is there's such distrust of government from top down, from, the federal government to the state government to the city government to the county government to the, dog catcher almost. I'm trying to be a little bit humorous here. That I think a lot of people just ignore it. It's, come and get me. I mean, you've listened to all my conversations. I don't know, but I think they have a heck of a time confiscating gold this time. I think it's much more likely they would try to tax it. I think that's probably the much more likely scenario, is that, no, you can have your gold, but all you greedy gold people out there, we're going to put on a windfill profits tax of, 30% when you sell your gold. And, of course, in that case, you don't want to sell your gold. You want to borrow against your gold. Because if you can borrow against your gold at, 2% and pay your bank 2% rather than a tax of 30%, it's a lot smarter to do that. And so that's, one of the many scenarios that could be one that, of course, I'd be talking about in the Morgan report on, what do you do or how do you do it or whatever. And the other part about, if they confiscate it, if you have all of your money in gold and silver and they confiscate it, you're going to have a pretty bad day. And it may turn into a bad week, a bad month, and even a bad year. But what I teach is that most people should have about 10% of their holding in precious metals, meaning a combination of gold and silver that suits them the best, and up to 20%. And that's really the right amount in my view for most people. So if it were to occur, certainly it would make for a bad day, a bad week, and a bad month, but it probably wouldn't ruin your life because 10% of your net worth is gone, but whatever else you have, be it stocks, bonds, real estate, lumber in your backyard, farm equipment, whatever it is, that's there. So I think it's, again, coming back to that word that you used a while back, balance. To have a balanced portfolio, you basically don't want to over-diversify. I mean, you don't want 1% of 100 things. That's over-diversification. You're not going to make any money doing that. It's highly unlikely that you would. But the proper structure was done by Ibbotson and Associates. That's an independent out of Chicago. And they determined that under the current economic conditions that all portfolios, which really says all people that can save, and I understand there's a lot that can, I get that. But all people that can, be them individuals or money managers, fund managers, mutual funds, whatever, should have a 15% weighting into the precious metals and in the metal, not in an ETF, not in any derivative, in the physical metal itself. And, of course, very few people even know of that study, and the people that do know of it don't pay much attention to it. But that's what they determined, that in good economic times, bad economic times, the current economic times, all economic times, you should have some exposure to the metal, and current day should have about a 15% exposure.
Well, that's very good advice. I know that, you mentioned lots of people can't afford to do any of this. And so my suggestion to everyone, regardless of whether you can or can't, is the best portfolio you can have is a good head on your shoulders and good people skills. This is what we need for the future, because who knows what's coming, I mean, I delve into all these nooks and crannies and I see disaster scenarios possible in all of them. But really and truly, when the, pedal to the metal time comes, we're going to have to learn how to think on our feet and learn how to deal with each other straight up. That's the honesty, the people's honesty that you're talking about.
Yeah, it comes back. I mean, I have an expression I haven't used in a while. It's, be real, buy real, and I forget the other real, but reality. I mean, not only do you know what reality is, but being real to yourself and being real to others is very important. And, we've almost become avatars. I mean, you go out in the public and you see people sitting next to each other, maybe even a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a husband and a wife, and they're just looking at their individual iPhones and they're texting somebody else. They're not even being real with each other, even though they're sitting right across from each other. So this concerns me a great deal as well. And I think you're right that, the most important thing is your value and your reality as a human being and how real you are. I mean, the idea of what is valuable, if I can digress, is certainly off the topic of silver, is if you have someone that you might want to hire to help you. If that person can type and that's all they can do, their value isn't that much. But if that person could type, clean a house, shoe a horse, do differential equations, fix an iPhone, and landscape, that person's more valuable. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm getting, I don't want to get myself in trouble here saying one person's more valuable than the other or that type of thing. In theory, they're both equally valuable because they're human. But as far as what the skill sets of those individuals are, if they differ and you have to use that, those skill sets are valuable to you, then obviously one person is going to be more useful to you. So that's the value. And most humans today have that one skill set that they're very, very good at and very little else. Whereas a balanced human being has a balance between, and I'm getting philosophical here, but it's physical, spiritual, and mental. And the more broad-based they are in all those things that have a high skill rate, maybe not an expert level, but let's say a workable level where you can do many different things. That is the kind of reality we're probably going to be going into. It's going to be juxtaposed to the reality that we're in now, which is really a non-reality where all this stuff is, pseudo this and avatar that, where you're in a world that's an electronic matrix that is a pretend world between, the television set, the movie theater, the Xbox, and whatever else keeps you glued to your mind only and perverted in a way or away from the real nature. I mean, most people don't understand, how to grow a vegetable garden or, even basic car repair, which is very difficult these days, by the way, but it's part of an example. But the idea that, let me state it this way. A real woman can do anything. Well, what's a real woman? Well, in my definition of what a real woman is, it's someone that is so balanced that they can do darn near anything. They can grow their own food, they can build, they can whatever. And very few have that. I mean, some of the survivalists do, and of course some of, some people do. But most people have been kind of conditioned to believe that if they can do X skill well and make quote-unquote money at it, that if they need help, they can get in finances, you get a financial planner. If you need help getting into shape, you get a personal trainer. If you are rich and you want to eat a nice meal, you get your own chef. I mean, the idea is that you aren't good enough by yourself. You have to go outside of yourself to hire all these other people that are skilled at what they do to make your life better because you're incapable of doing it on your own. Again, that's the exact opposite of the direction we're going to go, because when the collapse happens, it's going to be the people that can do a lot of different things and do them well enough. And then as things degrade further, which they could, you become more skilled at it. I mean, the more often you chop wood, the more efficient you become to a certain degree. You find out, I can actually do this part first, and if I do this part next, it's a lot more efficient. And if I push them off this one side only instead of out in front of me, I can get more work done. I mean, that type of thing. Again, corny example, but true. And so that's the direction. I probably belabored the point a lot, Sophia. I didn't mean to, but the idea is very important. To thine own self be true, get a skill set, and do it without money. I mean, I'm going to keep going a little bit. A lot of people have the misconception, a lot of my followers, that money is a solution in and of itself, and it's not. And I want to do a real quick thought experiment, and I'll leave the topic alone. But if you have a lot of real money, gold and silver, and the collapse happens, depending on how severe the collapse is, that money may not be that valuable to you in certain arenas. You talked about silver being able to be bartered almost everywhere and always, and I think that will hold to some degree. There'll be some people that won't take it. But if I wanted to buy a cow, for an example, and all the cows are wiped out because of weather or the mad cow disease, they were all shot. It doesn't matter how much money I've got. If I want to have a steak and it doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist where it could be transported to me, it doesn't matter how much I'm willing to pay for it. If it's not there, money doesn't solve that problem. So money in and of itself is not the solution. Maybe a better example is going to a desert island, and an island out in the middle of the ocean, and one subject A has a huge hoard of gold and silver coins, just huge. Let's say 500 million of each. He's a billionaire in gold and silver. And that's all he's got. He's got one palm tree and all this gold and silver. The other one is on an island, and he has no gold and silver, but he's got a water well, crop, eating utensils, and a tent. That person is far wealthier than the one with gold and silver. So it depends on the context whether or not money is going to be a solution or not. And of course, it's between those two examples that I just made. But the idea that, I've got money, I'm going to be, real money. I've got, the fiat's gone, I've got gold and silver, I'm going to be fine. No, you're not. It depends on how deep the collapse goes. It depends on what part of the country you're in. Depends on the dynamics of what happens in your area. So there's a lot more to it than just, gold will save me. It won't.
Well, yeah, that was a lot of philosophy and examples. I still believe, David, that there's something about shiny stuff that people prize. People prize what glints. I was thinking about this the other day. Maybe it's because they look up in the sky and seriously, the sun looks like gold and the moon looks like silver. And then there are the stars, which are little twinkling jewels. Maybe that's why people have put this importance on these metals and gems. And they have always collected them and traded them and worn them. I mean, there were times when people wore their wealth, right?
Absolutely. It still happens in India. I mean, until India became, richer, which they are now, and they've certainly buy a lot of silver, but they've lately, last decade or so, bought a lot of gold. The women wore their wealth in silver bracelets on their hands, on their wrists. And that still holds to a large degree. So that's not even in the modern world. I mean, the Indians, particularly of almost any nation on the planet, are the least trustworthy as a whole on their government's ability to maintain value of their currency. They know that it fails, and therefore any savings they have, it goes into precious metals. And that's not as true. I'm sorry, I just have to back up slightly, because with the industrialization of India, there is, a stock market, and they're becoming more westernized or more bankerized, you might say, and the banking system has kind of convinced them, you don't want precious metals, you want to buy these stocks over here, that kind of thing. But nonetheless, the history of India is very, very partial to precious metals, and that still exists to a large extent.
And people put their wealth in their teeth. Remember the gold teeth?
Sure.
When was that first started?
Oh, I wouldn't know. I don't know. Quite some time.
You had to have some ability with dentistry. I mean, it had to be connected to advances in dental care.
Exactly.
To be able to put gold in people's mouth as their teeth.
Correct.
But that's how people would also value themselves. They would smile at you and you'd count their gold teeth. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting that we are in this, deep down, it almost seems hardwired in us that anything that shines, we want. And we want to keep it and save it and hoard it and wear it and trade it, if necessary, put value on it, increase the value of it. I think that's part of just human beingness,
Well, I think you're right. I mean, in fact, I know you're right, because if you look at what people have determined, I mean, there's an argument about, money can be anything. Well, if you take that argument to its logical conclusion, if money can be anything, it can be gold and silver. So that argument fails if you just do a little thinking. And the other part is what has the market determined over century after century after century, and it's always determined gold and silver are the preferred money. And well, seashells were money, and salt was money, and cattle was money, and all those are true. But it was money for a very short time. The absolute truth is that over long periods of time, nothing has ever replaced gold and silver as what the people choose as money. That's a fact. So if cattle was money, that's fine. But it was at a time when they didn't know about silver, it wasn't present or whatever, but gold and silver are the choice of the people. And of course, when you get into the banking elite and they take gold and silver out of the equation, and then they say this is money because we make it a law, and you're forced to do something that you wouldn't necessarily do, now you've got control. And let's face it, money is power. And when you are able to control that 100% because you're the bankers, then there's a lot of disruptions in the marketplace. And that's what we've seen now for quite some time. And it will continue. In fact, by the way, it's probably important to voice that usually from the time you go on a pure fiat standard to a collapse is roughly 40 years. So if you go from 1971, you'd be at like 2011. And of course, we're beyond that, I can add. But we're at a point now where, we're getting kind of close to where this thing won't go much longer. That's why I think, for lots of reasons, that one and others is why we're probably not going to go till 2020 without some kind of repeat of 2008 or acceleration of what already happened in 2008, which really hasn't been corrected anyway.
It's a lot like the concept in ocean science of the 100-year storm. We haven't had in Southern California a 100-year storm. That's when the waves are so big and the storm is so fierce it takes out the entire coastline. So we haven't had that yet, and we're past 100 years. So they're waiting for it. But of course, as we know, weather is artificially created now and storms as well. So that throws a bit of a wrench into the formula. But yeah, everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat, wondering what's going to happen, wondering where they should put their faith and their trust. So you've really helped us, I think, other people who listen to this show will agree, to understand the long-term importance of the underdog metal. I didn't know it was called that, but that's a great concept, way of describing it. And maybe that's why they've got the price so low now, because they want us to not pay attention. There's nothing to see here. Don't buy this. So that no one will have any when it starts going up. And then they'll drive themselves and the whole world wild, because everybody will beat down the doors again.
You're right. I mean, more silver will be bought at 30 or 35 than will be bought at 16 or 17. It's unfortunate. I've watched markets for 40 years, and the idea to buy low and sell high just doesn't take place. People like to follow, and they get excited when things are moving up. And when their neighbor buys at a high price, they're willing to buy at a higher price. But when we're in the doldrums, like right now, when you can buy silver basically for the cost of what it takes to produce it, or maybe even less than it takes to produce it, people aren't interested.
Yeah. But then again, when it starts to mount, there will be people getting into it. And if it ever goes up to like $200 an ounce, which is what everybody's wishing for, the ones that bought at the last peak, then at least those people, as it starts to climb into the 30s, 40s, they'll be in, right?
If they held, they'll be in, sure. And, all markets have their dynamics, all markets, and silver's no exception. So there's people that probably bought at 35 and held it for quite some time and, listened to my arguments or others or read and just got disgusted and gave up and sold it at, 20 or 25 or whatever, took the loss and moved on. And a lot of those people never come back to that market. They just took a beating on the silver market. They hate it. They may even dislike me, and they're just never going to come back to it. There's others that did that, and they'll come back to it. they'll say, oh man, I was wrong. I should have held it, but it is going to 100. I'm getting back in, and they will. But most people that leave a market, most won't return. They just they have such a, it depends. If they bought a small, depends on the individual. I mean, there's so many scenarios, I won't go through them all. But generally speaking, once someone leaves the precious metal, other people are bugs. They will buy it and they'll never sell it, no matter what. That when it goes all the way up, and I tell people sell, or trade it, or cash out, or lighten it, or don't sell it all if you don't want, but sell half or whatever, they won't. They are married to it, and they'll never sell it. So there's like those two, there's several extremes, but that's an extreme. It actually takes place more in the precious metals than any other market I'm familiar with.
It defines them.
Yeah.
It's their hoard. They're not going to loosen it up and watch any of it roll away and turn it into something else, because it's part of their self-definition now. Yeah. So anyway, well, I thank you very much. Is there anything you think that I should get you to talk about still? We've done almost an hour and a half. Is there something that we've missed?
No, I just will give out some more information, I think, for the podcast. One, if you're interested in seeing more of my work, you should go to our YouTube channel, which is called Silver Guru. So just get on YouTube and in the search engine type in Silver Guru. And if you're going to watch any of the videos, and there's tons to watch, I suggest you watch Escape the Matrix. It's only about, I think it's a couple minutes long, if that long. But it's something that I took a great deal of effort to make. And it talks about silver in connection with a lot of things that Sofia does. So that'd be one to watch. The other thing is, if you're a Twitter nut, and I like it from the aspect of I'm a pretty avid reader, and I can let people know what I'm reading. And so I use it as a feed mechanism for people that are, kind of on the intellectual side, or like to at least be informed, usually alternative media, on what's going on in money, metals, and mining, primarily in the economy. And so I will feed our Twitter feed, which is at SilverGuru22, and give you articles that you might contemplate. And then on the website itself, which is silver-investor.com, there's a free e-letter that comes out every Saturday. You can sign up for that for free. And there are 3 levels of membership service depending on how much you really are into primarily the resource sector, but focus on gold and silver.
Well, David, thank you very much. I was going to mention your website and I'll make links to some of this in the description of the show. And I really am grateful. I also urge people, just pick a David Morgan interview and listen. Search for them. I think you have do you have links on your website for that?
We do it on the weekend. Because I do so many, I usually do 2 or 3 a week. And we put them into like the file that we mail out on the weekend to say, this week I was on this, program or whatever. But all of them end up on the YouTube channel, or almost all of them end up on the YouTube channel. So if you're on the YouTube channel and you're on my channel, I think, can you search within a channel for different things? I think you probably can.
Yeah, you can you go to the link that says videos and you can see the whole collection, and then there must be a way to type into YouTube the words. But anyway, I just wanted to say I picked a show, I listened to it, and I actually understood some of it. So, I'm not a professional silver type, but I thought that it was very, very helpful. And you never know what you're going to learn, and it might start you off in a new direction. Just those little dribbles of information that you didn't expect. This is what we're here for. Learning. So thank you, David. I'm very honored that you did this with me and for me, and I'm sure people will greatly appreciate it, because we did go through a lot of the basics, and I intended to ask my own questions so that if I had understanding, then perhaps other people would as well.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your interest.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have you back when it starts to climb, or before that, and we can watch the lemmings.
Okay, great.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.